Okay, so for the next problem, right, we have set up that we're going to sketch two periods of the cosine function, right? So we're going to sketch two periods of y equals cosine of x, right? And we're going to do that in degrees, and we're going to do that in radians, right? So once again, for the cosine function, we understand that if I start at 0 degrees, the cosine function is 1. Then the cosine function at 90 degrees is 0, and then -1, back to 0, and finally, once I make a full revolution, it's back to 1. So when I plot this in degrees, right, if I say that this is 1, this is 2, here's -1, -2, labeling my axes, right? So at 0 degrees, cosine function is 1, right? And then at 90 degrees, it's 0. At 180 degrees, -1, 270, back to 0, 360, back to 1, right? And I want to connect these dots with a smooth wave-like curve, right? And I'm going to follow that same pattern going backwards, right? So I follow the same pattern: 0, -1, 0, +1, right? And I come over here, smooth wave-like pattern, right? Make sure the axes are labeled, make sure the points are clearly visible, okay? And if I was in radians at 0, right, we'll say, right, if that's 1/2, that's 1, right, 2 up here, -1, right, so at 0, we're 1, right, and once we make a full revolution, we're 1 again. Half of a revolution, cosine is at a minimum, right, halfway between the two on the central axis, halfway between the two on the central axis. And I'm not going to connect with straight lines, but a smooth curved line that have that sinusoidal shape, right? And I'm going to repeat that pattern. Right, to be able to draw, right? So I have maximum at the beginning and at the end of the period, minimum halfway through the period, and between the max and the min, halfway between, I'm on the central axis. Alright, so set this up. Alright, so there I have my graphs. Okay. How do I determine the y-intercept? Same thing. Y-intercept is if x is equal to 0, right? So therefore, right, if x is equal to 0, and what I'm going to have is the cosine of 0, which equals 1, so therefore a y-intercept of 0, 1. X-intercepts, how do I determine those? Well, the x-intercepts of the cosine of x, y is equal to 0, so therefore the cosine of x is equal to 0. Right? The first time that happens is at 90 degrees or at pi/2 radians. Right? So therefore, at pi/2 radians, plus or minus half of a revolution. Right? So here, then go around half of a revolution. So pi/2 plus or minus some multiple of pi, or 90 degrees plus or minus 180 degrees times n, right? So some half revolution. Degrees, use degree symbols, right? Radians, don't use degree symbols, right? Most typically your radians will be in terms of pi. Very important that we can do these things.